Welcome back to the Jewish Music Platform. I'm Tuvia Kopstein. This episode is another treat. They're all treats. This is another treat. This is an interview with Daniel Ahaviel, who is a virtuoso Hasidish violinist, fiddler. He lives in Israel. He tours the world. He wows his audiences. He just happened to be in the Detroit area a few weeks ago, and we hopped the opportunity to interview him, which we hope to do as Jewish musicians pass through the area. As you know, Detroit is not the center of the Jewish world, as much as we'd like it to be, but we'll take the opportunities as they come. Now, if you don't know about Daniel Ahaviel's playing, you are in for a treat. Check out this clip, which was about 10 years ago at the Haas concert, which I think, I'm not a historian, but I think this was his real introduction to a larger American audience. Unbelievable. You're going to love hearing Daniel's story. Amazing story. Such a deep Jew. And you'll see in this episode, my co-host Moshe Sherzin wasn't able to make it, but don't worry, he's coming back. He's very much involved. Just wasn't able to make it for this recording, so I had to go it alone. And I must mention the generous sponsorship of this episode's sponsor, Rabbi E.B. Bunny Friedman and Mrs. Shandy Friedman. Thank you very, very much for sponsoring. The Jewish Music Platform exists only because of the generosity of our sponsors. Please reach out for individual sponsorships. ravtuvnetwork@gmail.com, RAVTUV network@gmail.com. It's very affordable and we bring a lot of value. Without further ado, the Jewish Music Platform with violinist, fiddler, Daniel Ahaviel. We are thrilled to be here with you. Daniel, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you.
Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, do you prefer Daniel, Daniel?
Daniel's
Daniel,
fine.
Daniel,
Sure,
okay.
Sure.
Very good. Okay, Daniel, obviously you are a virtuoso violinist and you're Hasidish Yid, and obviously those things don't normally come together. There's a story here for sure, and we'd love to hear as much as you can share with us of your story.
It's kind of a bit difficult to pinpoint highlights, but basically I've been playing the violin for over 50 years, since I was 8 years old, and I'm approaching 60 now, so Baruch Hashem. Started off as a classical violinist. By the time I was 18 and went to university to do a degree in music, I noticed that my whole attitude towards the classical music world had changed, and I was starting to explore just about everything else. That was a journey. It was a real journey that started, I think, when I was at university, and I found myself researching an article about aesthetics of music, which was to do with a project I had to do as part of my degree. And what I discovered is that something that aesthetics were being touted as something very kind of the ultimate means to be able to decide what is and isn't worthy music. But when
That's how you define aesthetics of music?
Well, that would appear how they were using this concept of aesthetics. Is it aesthetic or not? And what I discovered by looking up the literal meaning of the word aesthetics was that it's an entirely subjective decision. And when I looked at that, I thought, well, wait a second. If I'm living in a world where the ideals are totally subjective, then what am I basing myself on? And I started to think about that, and it occurred to me that the classical musicians that I was studying with described classical music as serious music. Mm-hmm. And I understood from that, the implication, of course, is that nothing else is serious. And so then I thought to myself, well, wait a second, there are cultures all over the world, musical cultures that are not classical music, high culture kind of cultures. And why should I assume that they have less validity than the classical culture? And then I asked myself, well, then on what do you base this decision of validity? If aesthetics are a purely subjective thing, what do you base it on? And then I kind of, through my own process of exploration, self-exploration, and examination of what I could understand and see around me, I realized that actually every culture, its music, the worth of its music is its purpose in the culture. The music serves a purpose. It's not just something nice to have, a background to accompany your life. There's a depth there. Otherwise, we wouldn't hold on to it so much. It wouldn't be so important to us. And when I realized that, I thought, well, okay, so you cannot decide that something is not valid just because you are not part of that culture and you do not understand its cultural worth. And when I realized that opened me up completely. It made me realize that every single culture has its own worth, its own validity, and its own purpose. And that changed my whole view. It meant basically I started to explore musical cultures from all over the world with a totally different attitude, not with a culture of a kind of ethnocentric, imperialistic kind of outlook. And that eventually led me, among other things, to come to Eretz Israel and to connect to Jewish music. And that connection opened me up to the cultural values that were behind Jewish music, which are basically Torah values. So I saw that process happening. In retrospect, I realized that process was bringing me to be open towards teshuva. And the depth of that, which is fascinating for me, is that it was only after I discovered the teachings of Rabbi Nachman that I saw that there's a Torah in Likutei Moharan where Rabbi Nachman says that every nigun has a chokhmah and every chokhmah has a nigun. And what he's basically saying there, when you go a bit deeper, is that there is a guiding wisdom in every culture, and the music is representing and expressing that guiding wisdom. And when I realized that, it gave me a deeper understanding of what I'd seen when I was a student, which was you can only judge a culture in the sense that you are part of that culture and you understand its cultural values and the purpose of music and within that culture. So when that became clearer to me, it became obvious that I'm on a path, and that path is to understand something deeper about music and its purpose in our lives. As I say that, eventually led me to teshuva. That's another story, but okay, so far so good.
So let me ask you, take a step back before that. What kind of Jewish home did you grow up in?
Okay. My parents, Zichrono Livracha, were very, very good people, very caring people, very liberal in their outlook. We did not have any Jewish holidays in our home. The only thing that I understood about us being Jewish was that my father grew up in Poland and most of his family did not get out. And so the Holocaust was kind of like the Jewish, the thing about being Jewish in our family, and really nothing else. I didn't have a bar mitzvah. Things changed for me later on in life, like in my early 20s, when I started to get interested, because I was starting to want to understand what does identity mean for me. And when I started to explore that, I realized, well, I am Jewish and I have no idea what it means. The last place I expected to find the meaning I was looking for was in a Torah lifestyle. When I first came to Israel, I had no expectation of wanting to live in Israel. So the two very last things I expected to happen was that I would want to live there and I'd become religious, and both happened.
Did you have any exposure to religious Jews growing up, wherever you grew up?
Right. So I grew up in an area in London called Hampstead, which is a very nice, very bourgeois kind of neighborhood, okay. Very pretty, very pleasant. Everyone's very nice there. Lots of Jews, but no mezuzahs.
No mezuzahs.
No mezuzahs. Hardly none. And one station after Hampstead on the Underground is Golders Green, which probably people know is a very Jewish area, a lot of Jews there, and restaurants, Jewish kosher restaurants and stuff. And I used to travel through Golders Green to go to secondary school, and so I knew what Golders Green was about.
You saw who came on the train.
Well, yeah, on the train, the bus, whatever. I'd see people dressing like I do now, and I had no sense of connection with them, and they just seemed like something alien to me, completely. And but when I finished university and I was back in London, after a couple of years of kind of like dithering around, not really knowing what to do with my life, one of the things that happened is that I moved to Golders Green with some friends, and we were living in a shared house, and I'd be walking through the streets of Golders Green and seeing people, Haredi people, and trying to make some kind of connection with them, but not really knowing how. And so then that led me eventually to decide that I had to come and visit Israel, because I had to understand something. What's the shaykhus of all of this to me? And as I say, I came to Israel with an expectation that I'd be picking up a spark of something that was once real and was now no longer real, because I'd believed that myth that was propounded, that religions are basically empty husks of something that had a kernel of truth once. This is an approach in the world towards religion in general. And I kind of assumed that. And then I came to Israel, and that completely changed my life.
Can you tell us more of the details of how? And I thought that you were saying you came to Israel and as part of your study of musical culture and the meaning of music to each culture, and you're saying you came also to make this connection with the people that you noticed were religious, and you want to understand some of them. So is it both happening at the same time?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't. I mean, my musical exploration was more general. It wasn't specific. It wasn't specific to Jewish music. It was just like learning about other cultures and having an open mind about the value of those cultures. And coming to Israel was more, as I say, about my roots in terms of not specifically the musical side, but trying to understand what's it got to do with me. When I arrived in Israel, I traveled a lot. I hung out with a lot of young people and played a lot of music with people, and it was exciting time. It took a good few years before I came towards being religious, after I'd already got married. My wife came from a more traditional home.
Also British?
No. She came from an Iraqi family.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, her father grew up in Baghdad. She was born in Ramat Gan. And so we were already married. We already had 2 kids when we first started keeping mitzvahs. And that in itself is a story, but we may or may not get onto that.
Okay. I don't know which way to go. There's so much to talk about. So this would be like in the mid-late 80s that we're talking about when you're coming to Israel?
Right. I came to Israel the very first time at the end of 1987 for a 3-month visit. Okay. And at the end of that time, went back to England and tried to get back into my life there, and really couldn't. I was 2 months I was in London trying to kind of like get back into life, and I just felt empty and felt like I was living in a world that was meaningless to me. And after Israel, and after 2 months, I bought a one-way ticket.
Was your life in London, was that a musical performing
No,
life,
at that particular time in my life, I was kind of like in between everything. I'd finished university. I didn't want to work in music because I felt like music was too holy, funnily enough, too pure. And I felt that was kind of like prostituting it in a way, like cheapening it. To make a living, to make money out of it. Yeah, I felt it was something too.
Even as a concert violinist.
Well, I wasn't in that situation yet. Okay. I knew, I felt inside of myself that I had the capability, but I wasn't there yet. So I was like playing here and there, and not, nothing particularly, no plan, as it were. And I don't know what else to tell you about that.
Okay. So the one-way ticket, and that led to getting married. That led to and then let's tell the story.
Tell the story. Okay.
About how I think everyone would be disappointed if we didn't hear it.
Okay. So it's there are lots of different stages along the way. basically, I think when I look back on it, I can see how Hashem was like gradually drawing me in because he knew that I was an obstinate SOB, as they say. Excuse my language. And I was very obstinate. I was very anti-religion. After we'd been married a few years, my wife suggested to me, she said, we should keep the holidays, it'd be nice for the kids and so on. I said, what do you mean? What do we need that for? And also, I'd argue about it. And, every time we'd have this conversation a while later, she said to me, maybe we should keep Shabbos. And I said, what it was? Shabbos it's not a day of the week, it's a state of mind. That's a quote from me. And the truth is, I do believe that it's a state of mind, but I also know that it's also one day of the week, and you can't divorce the pshat from the sod. And that was what I didn't know at the time. What then happened is we used to visit my parents once a year in London, and they'd come to visit us once a year. And on one of our visits to London, my wife had just finished her studies, and she had spent 3 years studying homeopathy, classical homeopathy, and Gestalt therapy. And she kind of assumed that those studies would give her the answers she was looking for in life. And when she finished them, she realized she had now an occupation, but it didn't satisfy any sense of the meaning she was looking for. And so she was kind of like, at a crossroads and with a big question mark about what she'd done with her life so far. And we were in London, and we were driving through London, and suddenly we saw a mural on the wall, a huge mural, that was advertising a new age shop called the Mystic Maze. Now, when I was, before becoming religious, I was very much into places like this. You go in there, you get a reading, you buy, crystals or books on self-help or awareness, self-awareness, all kinds of stuff like that. So I was into that. So, and my wife knew that. And so when we saw this mural, she said to me, why don't we go in and get a reading? So I said, okay. We went in and got a reading. There was this young woman with, I just remember having lots of hair everywhere. And it was and loads of like bangles and whatever, very, demonstrative personality. And she, said she'd give us a reading. So she did for both of us. And my wife, what she got out of that when we left there was that she was told that there were those in the spirit world who were trying to contact her, and that she should listen to her dreams. And so on our way back to my parents' house, we bought stopped in a stationery shop and bought a little notebook for her, and she went to sleep with the notebook next to the bed. And the next morning I wake up and I see her scribbling away frantically, and I said, what's going on? She said, shh. She was like writing, don't disturb me. And when she finished, I said, so what's it about? She said, I had a dream. I said, what was the dream? She said, I dreamt I was in a large room like a hall, and one wall was all books. So anybody who's grown up in the Haredi world, that's a very, regular, normal thing. But in a secular home, that's very unusual. And so anyway, she said, so in this place, in my dream, I met a woman who had been in my Gestalt studies with me, who was religious from her home. And she reached up to the top right corner of the bookshelf and pulled down a book and brought it to me and said to me, this book has got all the answers you're looking for. I said, well, what's the name of the book? She said, I don't know, Likutei, Moharan, something like that.
Wow.
And we'd never heard of this book.
Wow.
Yeah, in the dream. And we'd never heard of this.
That's an explicit dream, yeah.
Right, and she'd written it down. And then time went by, and we kind of forgot about it. And then we came back to Eretz Israel. And then on Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul, because that was in Av, Erev Rosh Chodesh Elul, she got a phone call. And there's a woman on the phone saying to her, excuse me, do you have a kindergarten? I said the kindergarten on Shabbos, and nobody knew what I meant. What do you call it?
A gun?
Yeah, a gun.
Yeah.
It's in Hebrew, it's gun. Kindergarten, I thought everyone was a kindergarten. Okay. So she said, do you have a gun? She said, no. She said, will you have a gun? No. Did you have a gun? No. So normally what would you say at this stage? You'd say, sorry, it must be a wrong number, and put the phone down. But before my wife could say that, this other woman on the line said, wait a minute, is your name Sigal? She said, yes, it is. She said, oh, I'm so sorry. I had your name and phone number written down in my notebook, in my diary, but for some reason I got confused and thought you were a ganenet, And so they got chatting away, and this woman said to my wife, I believe that nothing happens by accident, and I'm sure there's a reason why I phoned you. And so they were chatting away. And she said, well, what are you doing with your life? So my wife said, I've just finished my studies. What do you study? Blah, blah, blah. So what about you? She said, I also study. What do you study? She said, I go to a shiur once a week on the book Likutei Moharan. And my wife was like, as they say, was dumbstruck. Yeah. She said, wait a minute. I dreamt about that book. She said, well, why don't you come to the shiur? So I heard this from my wife and I thought, oh my God, they're going to brainwash her. Because that was my outlook then. Sure. And so she went to the shiur and I was dreading it. And when she came back, I said, so how was it? She said, she knows me. She said, it wasn't that special. But she said, I bought the book. And she bought the book, this in Likutei Moharan, a nice thick version of Likutei Moharan. And
just a technical question: you were all speaking Hebrew fluently at this point because you're living in Israel, okay.
Right? But when I first went to Israel, I didn't speak any Hebrew at all.
Oh, okay.
So by now, we were speaking Hebrew at home,
right?
And a number of years later, and anyway, so as time was going by, she was sitting and reading this book all the time. And it was a bit disturbing. I didn't know where this is going to lead. And then, as I said on the Shabbos Kiddush, I'm not in any way chauvinistic. I've done a lot to encourage my wife to develop her own talents and her own aims in life. But one particular day, at this time, I used to teach in a secondary school in Yerushalayim, teach music. And on one particular day, as I was about to leave the house, I looked round and I saw my wife sitting on the sofa, on the corner of the sofa, in a certain posture with the book. And our two kids were on the floor, on the carpet, with a small pile of toys there. And I looked over into the kitchen and there was a small pile of dirty dishes in the sink. And that was what I saw when I went out of the house. I came back 5 hours later, and as I walked in, I saw the pile of dishes was a bit higher, well, quite a bit higher. The pile of toys was quite a bit higher. And my wife was sitting on the same corner of the sofa in the same posture reading the book.
What was the posture?
Okay. certain posture, whatever. Anyway, so I said to her, tell me, have you done nothing all day? I've been out for 5 hours and nothing's changed. And she said, she said, I have to tell you something. I said, go ahead. So she said, so sit down. I said, what's going on? She said to me, I've lost all power in my legs, all strength in my legs. I said, what are you talking about? Let's call a doctor. She said, no. She said, I asked Rabbi Nachman and I opened Likutei Moharan and it opened on this Torah here, Torah Kuf, Torah 100 and Likutei Moharan, the first half. And in that Torah, Rabbi Nachman says that all the world receives its spiritual abundance through the Torah. And in which case, why would there be a situation where you can have one tzaddik who's very easygoing and relaxed, and another tzaddik who's no less of a tzaddik, who's very kapdan, very hard and
demanding.
Demanding, right. Why? If both receive their spiritual abundance from the same source, why would they be different? So he says that the person who's more easygoing, the amount of light that they take into their neshama from the Torah, they pass it out through their deeds. So the Torah flows through them. And that's why they're easygoing, because there's a flow going on there. They're not obstructing that flow. They're helping it to happen. Whereas somebody who's very harsh, the amount of light they're taking in from the Torah is much more than the amount of light they're putting out. And the Rabbi Nachman says, "V'ma'or haTorah makeh bo," that the light of the Torah is hitting him inside. She said to me, that's what's been happening to me. I've been learning Torah and I haven't been keeping anything at all, and I feel like the Torah is burning me from inside. I said, well, that's terrible. What do we do about it? She said to me, and this was the phrase, this was the key phrase, as I generally tell the story, my wife is not dramatic. Really, really not dramatic, yeah? She said to me, I feel that if I do not keep this Shabbos approaching now, you can come and visit me in my grave. I feel if this Shabbos passes by without me keeping it, I won't have a reason to be alive anymore.
Wow.
So they're not dramatic, yeah. So I said to her, you know what?
She said it with a straight delivery, or was
totally
no emotion.
No, Emotional. Yeah, definitely there was emotion in the words, but yeah. So I said to her, you know what? I'm prepared to do whatever I have to do that you can keep Shabbos. I'm not prepared to make a commitment for myself. And that coming Shabbos was Shabbos Bereshis. And what we knew about Shabbos was you don't cook on Shabbos, you don't turn on electricity or on or off, and basically we cooked before sunset, and we did Kiddush, we did Havdalah. I didn't go to shul, but we spent the day very, very, family day, and it was very beautiful. And at the end of the Shabbos, it changed my whole attitude. Literally, Shabbos is what brought me to teshuva.
Just that first Shabbos, then.
Well, for one thing, I felt a sense of calm and peace like I'd never felt before when Shabbos came in. And that was so bizarre because I'd always felt like, there was some kind of barrier between me and whatever this was, this thing, Shabbos. And it's like keeping Shabbos meant you like passing through that barrier and seeing that the other side was a very beautiful place, That was one thing. And the other thing was when I was saying the words of Havdalah, מבדיל בין קודש לחול, בין אור לחושך לישראל, בין ישראל העמים, ויום השביעי לשיטים המעשה, something very, very deep occurred to me at that point, because I felt like somebody was shouting in my ear, are you listening to the words you're saying? And when I thought about it, I realized that all my life until that point, I'd always assumed that you can find good in anything if you look hard enough. And I felt the words of the Havdalah were saying to me, no, if you really want to find something that's truly good, you have to distance yourself from that which is not good. And that I realized was much, much deeper and much truer. And I thought, okay, I'm signed on. I'm signing on. That's it. And from that point on, I was in. It wasn't easy. It didn't happen all in one go, but I was committed.
Were you already Mekurev to Breslov through your wife's?
No, this is a bizarre thing. I mean, a major step in our beginning of our journey was her dream. But when we first became, Shomer Mitzvahs, Shomer Shabbos, the first thing we did was we were looking to see, like, my wife was the one who wanted to study because she was, very, very interested in learning. And so our second Shabbos, we stayed with newly found friends. This woman who phoned us accidentally, and her husband and family, and we stayed with them for Shabbos, and kind of didn't really connect. And they are also Baalei Teshuva Breslev, but we didn't really connect. I don't know. And then on Motzei Shabbos, so my wife was having a chat with the wife of this woman who'd phoned her, and she said, I'm looking to find a situation where I can study. And my wife said to her, this woman said to my wife, there is a young rabbi who I've heard about who teaches men and women together, obviously with a mechitza, but teaches them together and very deep stuff. And maybe that would interest you. So she took his phone number and the rabbi, and we phoned him she phoned him on Motzei Shabbos, and she said to him, Rabbi, my husband wants to study Torah, which was news to me. I didn't know that. So apparently, they say that Isha kshera osa et ratzon ba'ala. So this was my wife making my will for me. Osa et ratzono. But then the rabbi said on Motzei on the phone, he said, I'm giving a shiur on Monday night. Come to the shiur. And so we came to the shiur, and the most incredible thing happened. It was mamash amazing hashgacha, because we had so many questions, we knew very little. And everything we wanted to ask before we could ask it, he answered it. It was mamash amazing hashgacha. At the end of the shiur, we both came up to where the Rav was sitting, and my wife said, Rabbi, this is my husband I mentioned to you, and he said, come on Friday, I have Kabbalas Kal, come to my house and we'll discuss. And so we went to him on Friday, Kabbalas Kal, and he said to me, so you want to learn Torah? I said, well, to make my wife out to be a liar. So I said, yeah. So he said, okay, well, I have a challenge for you. And I think he caught on that, challenging me was a good way to get me to do stuff that I wouldn't otherwise do. And he said, are you prepared to come to my house every morning at 4:00 in the morning? I said, wow, okay. So
That's a difficult challenge.
yeah, so
Especially for the musician who wakes up at the who knows when.
yeah, it was a crazy challenge. So then he said to us, "Are you sorted for Shabbos?" It was now Friday afternoon, and it was the shkia was in 5 hours or whatever. So we said, no, we haven't started preparing Shabbos. So he said, well, why don't you come and spend Shabbos with me and with my family? And so we did spend our first, spend that Shabbos with the Rav and his family. And he became our Rav for the first 6 years in Tshuva. He was not a Breslev Rav. He was a Talmud of Rabbi Mordechai Scheinberger from the Old City. Rabbi Mordechai Scheinberger, for those who don't know, is very, very big tzaddik and makubal, who was married to the daughter of Brandwein, who was the Talmid Muvhak of the Baal Sulam. And so his wife was the daughter of his Rav, who was the Talmid Muvhak of Baal Sulam. So he was like, in terms of Talmidim, he was like the second generation. And so our rabbi was a Talmud of his at that time, and so we were learning a lot of Kabbalah and halacha, but not much Gemara, or at least we didn't learn how to learn Gemara, which is kind of a bizarre way to start tshuva, but that's how it started. Anyway.
Wow. Okay, so now tell us how does the musical journey, how did your music start to change when you start to learn Torah?
Okay, so another aspect of this thing about music and chokhmah having this interconnection. When my son was born, before we made tshuva, 10 months beforehand, he was my wife and my son were in Mizgav Ladach in the hospital there in Jerusalem. And I was visiting them every day, and just like spending time in Yerushalayim. We lived in Mevaseret Zion, just outside Yerushalayim at the time. And one of the things I did, I went to the pedestrian precinct on Yerushalayim, Ben Yehuda, and I was like hanging out there, and I saw a bunch of musicians performing in the street and playing kind of klezmer jazz kind of style. And I was curious. I went up to them and I asked them, "Do you guys play weddings?" And they said, "Yeah, we do." And I said, "Well, I'm a violinist, and are you interested in having a violinist play in the band?" And they said, "Well, why don't you come for a tryout?" And the craziest thing is that the place that they were playing that night was 100 meters away from the Mizgav Ladach, from the hospital. So I went and had a tryout with them, and they liked me, I liked them, and that was the beginning of me playing Jewish music for as a profession. And
you felt comfortable playing Jewish music? You had just from what you heard around.
It wasn't from hearing; it was all from notes. Okay. I was learning an entirely new repertoire. But when I look back on that, I realized that those 10 months of me playing Jewish music in Jewish events, it was kind of like breaking down my barriers to feeling connected to Jewish tradition, and because I'd never been involved in any of that, Jewish weddings, Jewish bar mitzvahs, or anything of that kind. So it was all new for me, and it was kind of like changing my attitude. One of the things I noticed, for example, there was one event where we were invited to play on Motzei Shabbos in a place, and they told us you have to get here as early as you can. And I'm not proud to mention that I was there earlier because I wasn't showing Shabbos at the time. And as soon as Shabbos was over, I was there and I was set up and everything. And the leader of the band, who was the bass player, he played double bass. He turned up quite late, before the starting time, but late in terms of setting up time. And one of the photographers kind of started laying into him, saying, "You're the band leader, and you couldn't be here on time, and all of this." And the photographer said, "It's after Shabbos, it takes time to get out." And so the guy said, "What's the problem? Sunset was at such and such a time. You could have been here 10 minutes later." He said, "No, it's not so simple. We have Ma'ariv, we have Havdalah," and this guy was like making fun of him. And I saw that, and I thought, that's not right. why should you make fun of somebody's religion? Why should you make fun of their religious practice? What's the deal here? I'd never even been aware that this stuff was going on in Am Yisrael, that there was this, a very critical and negative attitude towards religious people. So when I saw that, and this is a curious thing, because what happened there was my identification was with the band leader, even though he's religious and I'm not, or as I was then. I identified with him because I could see that this guy was being really unfair with him, and I think that kind of created in Shamayim a kind of a sense of connection and identification, because I was, recognizing a commonality with religious people that I hadn't felt until that point, and that opened me up, and the music and the joyous atmosphere in the kind of events we were playing, it really opened me up, and it made it easier for me to make teshuva, I believe.
Wow, thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
So tell me, at which point in time did you adopt your full levush? And did you become known as somebody and grow out the payas? And did you feel that you're totally part of this, 100%?
So it's a bit of a crazy story. When we'd been in teshuva for maybe only a few weeks, and I was, very far from dressing in a way that kind of meant fitting in with the community.
It was t-shirt and shorts, right?
Well, whatever. Which I wasn't specific,
Okay.
like colors, any colors went and whatever, But I remember we'd been in teshuva for maybe a few weeks, few months, and one night I had a dream, and I was looking in a mirror. And I had payas, huge round payas, like this, coming down from my hair, and I loved it. And it was like it was very extreme, and it was very attractive to me. I thought, this is something very special, and I told this dream to my Rav at the time, and he said to me, "You shouldn't rush it. You shouldn't rush it. Obviously he caught on that I was, very pulled to it, but he said, take your time. Don't rush into anything. When you're ready, it'll be the time for it." So it took me a while. It took me a while to ease into it. I think about becoming known as a performer. So they say that if you want to become a leader in your field, you have to start off as in a kind of apprenticeship. So I think my apprenticeship was playing, in particular, in the very first wedding band I played in, and every now and then.
Is that one that's known?
Well, it's a band that's known as Kol HaKavod, and Yedidya Freeman, who's also American, I think he's from Boston. He lives in the German colony in Yerushalayim, or he did there, and I assume he still does. And he didn't have just one band. He had a whole pool of musicians. He'd have a number of events. He'd send out different crews to different events. And so I was in that. And then every now and then people would ask me, can I invite just you or you and your own musicians? And I said, sure. So I started bringing my own, doing my own events, and other musicians, other bands asked me if I was available. I started playing with all kinds of different bands, and I wasn't, stuck with only one band. And I was performing a lot.
I think I first saw you with Menachem Herman. Is that possible?
Right. Yeah. So I mean, among others, I started working with Menachem, and we used to work a lot together. And it was a very, very, very special, very beautiful partnership.
It was so great to see that two virtuosos.
Baruch Hashem, yeah, and there was a very he is the ultimate mensch, Menachem. Really, I can say that wholeheartedly, and I really enjoyed, and still when we ever get together, I enjoy working with him and he's a good friend and a good guy, very special guy. So he was one. There were a few others. There was a band that when it started up, a band called Lechatchila. When they started up, I was their first violinist, and I played with them until eventually I was too busy, and they took in somebody else who's now their regular violinist. And a whole bunch of other bands. If anybody knows of Ariel Cohen, who's a mad scientist kind of keyboard player, He turns up to events with like 3 or 4 different keyboards and like a ton of pedals. And if he's left his own devices, he could just carry the whole event on his own. So he's another guy I play with a lot. There's a whole bunch of them, a whole bunch of musicians I played with and performed with. And then after years, I mean, I was so busy that if there were 9 days a week, I'd be working 10. That's how busy I was. And it occurred to me that the way to get less busy and work less hard and earn the same money was put up my prices, but I didn't feel comfortable to go beyond a certain level. And so people were still kind of like calling me up for, endless amounts of work, which is nice, but it wasn't making me a lot of money. And then I had David Fadida, who he represents a number of artists, and I knew him from, there was a kind of a very early version of A Star Is Born, for a Haredi Star Is Born, and the very first time they put that on, so he was one of the 2 people arranging it, and he invited me and Menachem to perform at the front of the stage. Each one would be at a corner of the front of the stage, and that in between things we would perform together. But the rest of the time we were just standing there, and it felt a bit, like a fifth wheel, as they say. And then I started getting more calls from David, and on one occasion he invited me to play at a bar mitzvah, and the bar mitzvah was obviously in a hall, and there was like a corridor leading to that hall, and the Kabbalah Spanim was in the corridor, and I was playing there with playbacks, with recorded playbacks on my own, and they wouldn't let people into the hall because they were already getting ready, preparing the hall and so forth, and so the corridor was very packed, and I was playing. I'm playing, and there were people like standing with their backs to me, and the back of their head was like a few inches away from my face. And it was a very bizarre kind of situation to be performing in. And then I noticed that David was standing in the corner, and he was watching me. And he was thinking. I could see he was thinking, and I didn't know what he was thinking. And then, not long after that, I got another invitation from him to play at an event, and he said to me, I want you to pay attention. I'm not inviting you to come and play the Kabbalah Spanim with playbacks. I want you to come later on. I'm going to get other people to do that. What I want you to come along and do is to come and perform in the middle of the dinner. I want you to give about 15, 20 minutes of your absolutely best material and give it all you've got. And then I would like to have a discussion with you after the event. So I go, okay. Now, this was a period in my life when I'd realized I was working very hard, and I realized that I probably needed an agent. So I'd started kind of thinking about it and looking around, and I tried out a few different people that maybe I could work with, and none of them felt right. And I was davening for this a lot. I was really davening for this a lot. And then suddenly this situation came along, and I went and played at this event, and I did a performance, and I raced around the stage and jumped and danced and all kinds of stuff and really gave it my all. And that wasn't something that I'd never done before. It was just like I'd never given it that much accentuation in my performance. And at the end, David was very, very excited. And he said, the reason I want to sit down and talk with you is I want to have a business meeting with you. And he basically said to me, I'm suggesting to you that I will represent you as your manager. And we need to talk about it and discuss all the different aspects and so forth. And we did actually start working together, and we worked together for 12 years in a situation where basically all my work came through him. And that worked very well for a long time, and it really, David really got me really advertised and really out there, and what they call it, mutag. What's mutag? Brand. He made my name into a brand.
A brand.
Right, which I'm not into all that terminology, but it works apparently. And
was this around the time when you played the Hask concert?
So one of the things that he arranged was for me to come to Hask 24, which was beautiful, Baruch Hashem. And he also introduced me to a lot of performances for Chabad, which basically mean that I've been performing all over the world. Not all of it was Chabad, but a lot of it was. So that was very, very helpful. And now we're no longer working together on the same way. I mean, occasionally I get work from him, but I'm basically working with anybody who approaches me. It's not the same as it used to be. But he's now representing Shuli Rand and Yonatan Razel, and he's Baruch Hashem, he's doing very well. But we just our paths converged, as it were.
Okay, so Daniel, do you record your own? Do you compose your own music?
Yes, I do. I actually have put out 5 albums, of which the first 2 are almost entirely traditional music. But the first one is it's called VeAhavta. It's very traditional tunes. The second album is called The King's Clothes, and it's also traditional melodies almost entirely, but with a more kind of like modern take. The styles are different. I'm playing around with styles there. The third album is a live album called Live in London. I performed there in 2002. And so we made an album from that. The fourth album is called Lev Ha'olam Ata, You Are the Heart of the World. And it's all original music. It's pretty unconventional stuff, but it's all my own compositions. The fifth album is called Live and Kicking, or Chai V'Kayam, and it basically is after like 10 years that I didn't put out an album, so the title was to say I'm still here. And it is mostly the kind of music that I perform, which means a mix of klezmer, Hasidic, gypsy, Irish country, all of that stuff, all together. So there's a bit of everything in that album.
Wow. Which are you most proud of the 5?
The truth is, I'm most proud of the 6th album.
Because it hasn't happened yet.
Well, it has happened. It's not out in the world yet. But we're actually at the stage of final mixing now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that will be called, do you know?
I have no idea what I'm going to call that album, but it is also almost entirely original music. The only parts of it that are not original are known tunes that I've done a very original take on. Mm-hmm. And what's different about this album, like the last time I did original music was me basically composing in my studio and doing almost all of the instruments on the computer and bringing in a couple of friends to add on a few extra bits.
You mean all synthesized?
Yeah, all sampled music.
Yeah.
And that was the 4th album, You're the Heart of the World. So this 6th album, I started off. All the recordings were done in a studio in Jerusalem. A very good friend, and a very special music producer and mixer is Amit Golan, who has done a lot of my mixes. And so we were chatting away, and he said, I want to show you something. And he played me a recording of Shlomo Katz, who works with him a lot. And I know Shlomo's music and stuff. And I listened to this recording, and I said, wow, this sounds like something totally different on another level altogether. And he said to me, what I did with Shlomo on this album is something that we've never done before. It was my suggestion. And I'm offering to do the same a similar idea with you. I said, so what's the idea? He said, instead of me just mixing your music, I'm suggesting that I will be a co-producer and that I will have an equal say, or at least not equal, but a much greater say in how we produce the music, in the shape of the music, the form. And, basically I'll be bringing to it a lot of stuff that you don't necessarily think about. About how to give it form, how to make it production-wise much better. So I said, okay, I'm prepared to go for it. He said, you'll have to prepare yourself, because you're going to have to swallow the bullet a number of times when I tell you about stuff that shouldn't be there, which you will want it to be there. I said, okay. So we went through this process. It's been about a year. We have 11 tracks already mixed. I'm working on the 12th and the 13th. Which will probably be the last 2, and it's the most powerful thing I've ever done, and I'm very proud of it.
Wow. Is it going to bring Mashiach?
Alavai. I've spoken in many different situations. On podcasts, and also I've had a few articles that have been written about me in Mishpacha and a few other places, and in all of these situations, what I've spoken about is the fact that music has immense power. For people who are secular and who feel like religion, as they understand it, doesn't satisfy their spiritual needs, most of the world who are in that situation consider music to be like almost their religion. And it's curious, and I've thought about this a lot. Why would that be the case? And so there are many answers to that. One of them is from Chassidus, and one of them is from observations on the world. Observations on the world, music breaks down barriers. And the reason it breaks down barriers is because everybody can meet on an equal footing in this space called music. You don't have to be a musician even. I've done this I've done drum circles where everyone sits around and plays drums, and you don't need to know how to play the drums. All you need to do is just click in to what's going on, and you're part of the situation. And being part of the music means that you're in the music, and the music's in you, and you're connecting to a level of your being which is much purer, much purer. And so that is on an observational level about the power of music. On a Chassidus level, the Torah is made up of letters and flags and the vowels and the ta'amim. And the ta'amim are obviously anybody who reads Torah knows that they describe the melody of the Torah. So in Chassidus, it's mentioned that each of these four aspects of the Torah corresponds to a different spiritual level, and that the letters of the Torah are the most gashmi aspects, the most material aspects of the Torah. And so we live in a material world, and we connect to the Torah through its most material aspect, which is the words. And the words describe ideas, and these ideas are how we live our lives. But the deepest level of the Torah, according to Chassidus, is the melody. And an example of this, and it's a very striking one, is that when Yaakov goes to get the bracha from Yitzchak Avinu, so his mother puts animal skins on him so that he won't realize that it's Jacob who's like a smooth skinned son. And then Yitzchak Avinu says to Yaakov Avinu, he says, "Are you my son?" And he says, "I am your son Esav." Now in English that sounds like an outright lie, but the Hebrew says Ani Esav bechorecha, and if you read that straightforward, it says, "I'm your son Esav." But the melody described by the Ta'amim says Ani, and there's like a rising up in the tone, a pause, and then Esav bechorecha, literally meaning I am me, and Esav is your firstborn. Yeah, it's you wouldn't understand that meaning, and you would suspect Yaakov of lying to his father unless you understand the meaning behind the melody. So the melody has that power, right? It translates a deeper level of meaning even than the words, and I firmly believe in that. So my attitude towards music in the world, and I'm Bezrat Hashem intending to make this happen as far as Hashem will give me the schus to do so, is to be able to try to be able to bridge differences through music. I firmly believe that a lot of the antagonism among the Jewish people and in the world in general can be definitely healed through music, and I would wish to do that.
Beautiful. Daniel, can you play for us something original from the new album?
Okay, so I'll play a melody for you from the new
like?
album. Yeah.
Shukaya, thank you so much, Daniel.
Pleasure. My
Yeah,
pleasure.
thank you so much.
Pleasure.